Eglin Field, Florida, late 1942. American aircrews, accustomed to the familiar heft of general-purpose high-explosive ordnance, regarded the newly delivered incendiary clusters with unconcealed skepticism. These were not the thunderous blockbusters they associated with decisive strikes. Instead, the crates held thousands of slender, 6-pound cylinders, each barely a foot long, bundled together in what appeared to be oversized, flimsy containers. The prevailing sentiment among the flight line personnel and even some command staff was that these firecrackers, as they were derisively called, represented a tactical misstep, an over-engineered distraction from the war's true demands. The stakes were immediate and profound. If these new weapons proved ineffective, countless sorties would be wasted, and the strategic bombing campaign, already facing stiff resistance, would lose precious momentum and credibility. Captain Robert Buzz Miller, a lead bombardier with 30 missions over Europe already logged, ran a gloved hand over the smooth, dull gray casing of one such cylinder. His initial assessment, shared by many, was one of bemusement. The M69 incendiary bomb, as it was officially designated, seemed almost toy-like compared to the 500-pound and 1,000-pound general-purpose bombs he typically aimed. Its design, however, was a product of meticulous research. Each M69 contained 2.2 pounds of thickened gasoline, or napalm, a gelatinous substance developed through a collaboration between Harvard University chemists and the U.S. Army Chemical Warfare Service. The napalm was contained within a hexagonal steel casing, itself packed into a larger M19 cluster adapter, which held 38 such units. When released from the bomb bay, the M19 cluster would open at a preset altitude, scattering the individual M69s. A small, delayed action igniter, powered by a simple fuse and primer, would then activate upon impact. Unlike conventional high explosives designed for blast and fragmentation, the M69 was engineered for thermal persistence. Its primary mechanism was not detonation, but rather the sustained, intense burning of its napalm filler, capable of reaching temperatures exceeding 1,600 degrees Celsius. Damage reports from early tests, though limited, indicated a burn duration of 5 to 10 minutes for each individual unit, a stark contrast to the fleeting concussive force of a high explosive blast. Production logs from the arsenal facilities showed an accelerating output, with initial monthly deliveries of 50,000 units in early 1943, projected to increase tenfold by year's end. This scale of production underscored a strategic shift, a move away from pinpoint destruction towards area denial and the systematic reduction of industrial and urban centers. The ideological implication was clear. This was a weapon designed not just to destroy structures, but to render entire districts uninhabitable, to break the will of a population by erasing the very fabric of their daily existence. The pilots, however, still viewed them through the lens of their immediate tactical experience, unable to reconcile the diminutive size of the M69 with such grandiose strategic ambitions. They awaited deployment orders, their skepticism firmly entrenched. The briefing room in England, late spring 1943, held a palpable tension, not of fear, but of weary expectation. Pilots of the 8th Air Force, veterans of the perilous deep penetrations into German airspace, settled into their seats, their faces etched with the fatigue of constant combat. They had grown accustomed to the familiar weight and shape of their ordnance, the standard high-explosive and incendiary bombs that had become their grim companions on countless missions. A new ordnance officer, fresh from the proving grounds, stood before them, a slight tremor in his voice as he introduced the M47 and M69 bombs. These were not the sleek aerodynamic shapes they knew. The M47, a 100-pound incendiary, was a cluster bomb, its casing designed to split open and release 18 smaller, magnesium-fade submunitions. Its appearance, especially in the early prototypes, was less a weapon and more a crude, cylindrical container, prompting a few low chuckles from the back rows. The N69, even stranger, was a 6-pound incendiary, a thin-walled steel cylinder filled with jellied gasoline, or napalm. It was described as a gelled gasoline bomb, and its most peculiar feature was a long cloth streamer attached to its tail. This streamer, the officer explained, was intended to stabilize its fall and ensure it landed nose down, puncturing its target. The pilots, accustomed to precision machined steel, saw the streamer and the seemingly flimsy construction, and open laughter rippled through the room. One pilot quipped, "Are we dropping fishing lures now?" Damage reports from earlier, limited tests had shown a peculiar effectiveness against certain structures, particularly those with wooden roofs or light construction, but the visual presentation of the bombs themselves undermined the data. The M47's magnesium filler, once ignited, burned at an astonishing 2,200 degrees Celsius, a temperature capable of melting steel. Yet its delivery mechanism seemed almost comical. The M69, with its sticky, burning fuel, was designed to adhere to surfaces, spreading its inferno, but its small size and cloth tail invited derision. Production logs indicated a rapid ramp-up in manufacturing, with thousands of these new incendiaries rolling off assembly lines in the Midwest, a clear sign of their strategic importance despite the initial skepticism. The Air Staff, in their directives, emphasized the shift towards area bombing, targeting the industrial heart of Germany, and these new weapons were integral to that strategy. Their purpose was not precision destruction, but widespread, uncontrollable conflagration. The pilots, however, viewed them through the lens of their immediate experience, where every pound of ordnance was a precious commodity and every delivery a life or death gamble. They valued the reassuring heft of a 500-pound general-purpose bomb, the concussive power that promised definitive destruction. These new, odd bombs, with their strange components and even stranger appearance, seemed a departure from the serious business of war. The proving grounds of Eglin Field, Florida, in late 1943, became the crucible where these new munitions would either validate their radical design or confirm the pilots' skepticism. The first test drops were conducted from B-17 Flying Fortresses, the standard heavy bomber of the era, flying at altitudes ranging from 10,000 to 20,000 feet. Instrumentation arrays, including high-speed cameras and blast pressure sensors, were meticulously positioned across the target area, a simulated industrial complex constructed from reinforced concrete and steel. Early damage reports, compiled from photographic reconnaissance and ground inspections, showed an immediate and stark divergence from conventional ordnance effects. A 500-pound general-purpose bomb, the M64, typically created a crater approximately 15 feet in diameter and 6 feet deep in soft earth, with a localized blast radius effective against unfortified structures out to 100 feet. Its primary destructive mechanism was fragmentation and direct impact. The new M66 bomb, also nominally 500 pounds, presented a different profile. Its thin case design, maximizing the explosive filler, meant it was not designed for deep penetration. Instead, upon detonation, it produced an overpressure wave of unprecedented intensity for its weight class. Damage assessments revealed structural collapse in reinforced concrete buildings up to 200 feet from the point of impact, with significant window breakage and internal damage extending to 500 feet. Pilot debriefings initially reflected a lingering doubt. They had grown accustomed to the satisfying thud and visible crater of the M64, a tangible mark of destruction. The M66, with its less dramatic initial impact signature, often appeared, from altitude, to have merely created a large dust cloud. This visual perception contributed to the initial dismissive attitude among many aircrews. However, subsequent ground inspections, particularly those involving engineers and ordnance specialists, provided a stark counter-narrative. The internal structures of the target buildings, even those at the periphery of the blast, showed extensive spalling and shear failure in load-bearing walls. effects rarely achieved by general-purpose bombs of equivalent weight. The M66 was not puncturing, it was pulverizing. Production logs from the Iowa Ordnance Plant indicated that by January 1944, over 10,000 of these M66 bombs had been manufactured, a rapid scale-up reflecting growing confidence in their potential. The initial procurement order had been for 2,000 units, a cautious commitment. The subsequent tenfold increase in production capacity underscored a strategic reevaluation of aerial bombardment tactics. The implications for strategic bombing doctrine were profound. If a single 500-pound bomb could achieve such widespread structural damage, the required bomb tonnage for a given target could be significantly reduced, or conversely, the destructive potential of a single bomber sortie dramatically increased. The shift from localized demolition to area effect destruction began to take root. The quiet understanding of this new power began to permeate the aircrews ranks, not through direct experience in combat, but through the detailed photographic evidence and engineering reports circulated during mission briefings. The initial laughter had faded, replaced by a growing, somber appreciation for the weapon they now carried. The first operational deployment of the M69 incendiary clusters occurred on the night of January 27, 1944, targeting Berlin. Bomber command records indicate that 378 B-17 flying fortresses participated in the raid, carrying a mixed ordnance load, with approximately one-third of the aircraft designated to carry the new incendiary clusters. Each B-17 assigned to the incendiary role carried between 110 and 120 M69 clusters, totaling over 13,000 individual bomblets per aircraft. Damage assessment photographs, taken 48 hours after the raid, showed extensive fire damage concentrated in residential and light industrial districts. The distinctive patterns of multiple, relatively small burn scars, often radiating from a central point, were consistent with the dispersal characteristics of the M69. The initial reports from reconnaissance flights estimated that over 600 acres of the city had been affected by fire, a significant increase in area compared to previous conventional high-explosive attacks. Further analysis of subsequent raids, particularly those against industrial targets in the Ruhr Valley during February and March 1944, provided more granular data. A post-strike report from a raid on Essen on March 11, 1944, noted that 250 B-17s dropped a combined total of 28,000 M69 clusters. Ground intelligence, compiled from resistant sources, indicated that fire brigades struggled to contain the numerous simultaneous blazes, often arriving to find entire blocks already engulfed. The effectiveness of the M69 was not solely in its destructive power, but also in its psychological impact. Interrogation files of captured German civilians and soldiers frequently mentioned the rain of fire and the overwhelming nature of the conflagrations. The sheer volume of small, persistent fires, ignited almost simultaneously across a wide area, overwhelmed traditional firefighting methods, which relied on containing a few large fires. Production logs for the M69 show a sharp increase in output following these initial deployments. From an average of 50,000 units per month in late 1943, production surged to over 300,000 units per month by April 1944. This escalation reflected a strategic shift, acknowledging the incendiary's capacity to achieve widespread destruction of urban and industrial infrastructure with fewer aircraft sorties than required for high explosive equivalents. The M69, initially viewed with skepticism, had proven its devastating efficacy in the crucible of urban warfare. Its deployment marked a turning point in the air war over Europe, shifting tactics towards area bombardment designed to incapacitate enemy production and morale through widespread conflagration. The laughing had ceased. Hamburg, July 1943. The fires had burned for days, consuming wood, brick, and human flesh in equal measure. The initial operational reports, filtered through the command structure, spoke of unprecedented conflagrations, a clinical term that barely hinted at the reality on the ground. Pilots returning to airfields across England had described the city as a boiling cauldron, a sight that elicited a mixture of awe and unease, even among those hardened by months of aerial combat. Damage assessment teams, entering the city weeks later, compiled photographic evidence and ground surveys that painted a stark picture. In the most heavily affected areas, the core of the city's residential and industrial districts, over 70% of all structures were either completely destroyed or rendered uninhabitable. The sheer scale of the obliteration defied conventional bombing metrics, which typically measured damage in percentages of individual buildings. Here, entire neighborhoods had simply ceased to exist, replaced by vast expanses of rubble and ash. The official casualty figures, meticulously compiled from municipal records and recovery efforts, eventually settled at approximately 42,600 fatalities. This number dwarfed the losses from any previous single bombing raid in the European theater, exceeding the combined civilian deaths from all previous RAF and USAAF bombing operations against German cities. The majority of these deaths, forensic analysis revealed, were due to carbon monoxide poisoning and heat stroke, trapped within the inferno rather than direct blast trauma. The strategic implications were immediate and profound. The German High Command, in internal memoranda, acknowledged the severe psychological shock inflicted upon the populace and the crippling blow to war production in the affected region. While exact production figures were difficult to isolate amidst the chaos, initial estimates suggested a 75% reduction in industrial output within Hamburg for the remainder of 1943, with some key factories requiring months to even partially resume operations. The operational success, measured against the destruction, generated a new, chilling calculus within Allied air forces. The concept of the firestorm, once a theoretical possibility, had been proven terrifyingly real. It demonstrated an unforeseen capacity for urban destruction, far exceeding the effects of high-explosive ordnance alone, and redefined the potential lethality of strategic bombing. The quiet hum of the returning bombers, once a sound of triumph, now carried a different weight. The B-29 crews, returning to Tinian and Guam, found their initial gallows humor replaced by a deepening quiet. The mission debriefings, once punctuated by boisterous recounts of flak evasion and fighter engagements, now often concluded with a stark silence, the faces of the airmen etched with a weariness that went beyond physical exhaustion. Damage assessment photographs, developed in the cramped photo labs on the islands, revealed urban landscapes reduced to lunar surfaces, the intricate networks of streets and buildings obliterated into featureless ash. These images, often projected onto screens in briefing rooms, offered a stark, undeniable truth. A single B-29 mission, carrying a payload of 6.9 tons of M69 incendiaries, could ignite firestorms, consuming 15 square miles of a city. The Tokyo raid of March 10, 1945. A singular event in its destructive efficiency had claimed an estimated 100,000 lives within hours, a figure that dwarfed the combined casualties of many conventional bombing campaigns. The sheer scale of this destruction, witnessed firsthand or through photographic evidence, began to weigh heavily. The ground crews, who had meticulously loaded the bombs, now saw the outcome of their labor in these same photographs. They had handled the canisters, stacked them in the bomb bays, and armed the fuses, their work a mechanical extension of the destructive process. The meticulous care they applied to each bomb, ensuring its proper function, now seemed to amplify the horror of its ultimate purpose. Their pride in technical proficiency was now intertwined with an unsettling awareness of the human cost. Conversations in the mess halls became subdued, often turning to the unspoken questions of morality and consequence. Some pilots, in their private journals, grappled with the cognitive dissonance of being hailed as heroes while knowing the immense suffering their actions had caused. The strategic imperative, drilled into them during training, to break the enemy's will to fight, now manifested in a landscape of utter desolation, a reality far removed from the abstract diagrams of military planners. Medical reports from the rear echelon began to document an increase in stress-related ailments among aircrews, beyond the typical combat fatigue. The psychological burden of witnessing such widespread destruction, even from thousands of feet above, was profound. The initial thrill of successful missions, of hitting targets with precision, slowly gave way to a more complex emotional landscape, one tinged with a deep, unsettling introspection. The war's end, they understood, would not erase the images or the knowledge of what they had wrought. Washington, D.C., late 1945. The war in the Pacific had concluded with an abruptness that defied all prior projections of protracted, bloody island-hopping campaigns. Within the Pentagon, the Joint Chiefs of Staff convened, their discussions now centered on the strategic calculus that had led to the unprecedented decision. The official reports from the Strategic Bombing Survey, compiled from meticulous on-site investigations and prisoner interrogations, began to circulate, offering the first comprehensive assessment of the atomic attacks. These documents detailed the obliteration of 90% of Hiroshima's structures within a 4.1 square mile radius, and the instantaneous incineration of 70,000 to 80,000 lives. Nagasaki, a city of industrial importance, saw 39% of its urban area destroyed, with an estimated 35,000 to 40,000 immediate fatalities. Such figures, staggering in their finality, were juxtaposed against the projected casualties of an invasion of the Japanese home islands, an operation codenamed Downfall. Military planners had estimated American losses alone could reach between 400,000 and 800,000, with Japanese civilian and military deaths potentially exceeding 5 to 10 million. The political leadership, from the Oval Office to the State Department, framed the bombs as a grim necessity, a means to avert a far greater human cost. Secretary of War Henry Stimson articulated this position in public statements, emphasizing the terrible responsibility borne by those who chose to employ such a weapon. He argued that the alternative, a prolonged conventional war, would have resulted in an even more catastrophic loss of life across both belligerent nations. The sheer scale of destruction, once viewed with a degree of disbelief, now served as a stark justification for the war's swift conclusion. Intelligence assessments indicated that Japan's military leadership, particularly the hardline factions, had been prepared to fight to the last man, mobilizing the entire civilian population for a final, desperate defense. The emperor's intervention, spurred by the atomic attacks and the Soviet declaration of war, was cited as the critical factor in breaking this resolve. Without the atomic bombs, it was argued, the war would have dragged on for months, perhaps years, exacting a toll that would dwarf even the devastation wrought by the new weapons. The narrative solidified. The bombs, while horrific, had ultimately saved lives by ending the conflict before the planned invasion could commence. This perspective, though challenged by some within the scientific community and a minority of military figures, became the dominant interpretation. It provided a framework for understanding the unimaginable power unleashed and the difficult choices made in the crucible of total war. The quiet, almost clinical analysis of casualty projections and strategic outcomes offered a necessary distance from the raw, visceral horror of the events themselves. The smoke still curled from the ruins of Tokyo and Dresden. But the immediate conflict had ended, leaving behind a profound reevaluation of aerial bombardment's role. The scale of destruction, particularly from incendiary campaigns, forced military strategists and international legal scholars to confront the implications of targeting civilian populations. The firestorm, once a theoretical possibility, had become a documented, repeatable phenomenon, altering the calculus of urban warfare permanently. Post-war analysis, drawing from detailed damage assessments and photographic reconnaissance, confirmed that incendiary attacks had achieved a level of area destruction previously unimaginable. In Tokyo alone, the March 10, 1945, raid consumed an estimated 15.8 square miles of the city, a figure that dwarfed the area destroyed by conventional high explosives in many European cities. This efficiency in obliteration, achieved with a fraction of the tonnage of high explosives, underscored the unique destructive power of the new weapon. The sheer human cost, meticulously catalogued in casualty reports and survivor testimonies, began to shape nascent discussions around the laws of armed conflict. The targeting of urban centers, even those with significant industrial capacity, raised questions about proportionality and discrimination, fundamental tenets of humanitarian law, while the immediate post-war tribunals focused on atrocities against individuals. The broader impact of strategic bombing on civilian populations became a persistent, unresolved issue. The development of the napalm bomb, a direct descendant of the M69's chemical principles, further refined the incendiary weapon, making it even more potent and deployable. Its sticky, persistent burn was designed to adhere to targets, including human flesh, ensuring maximum thermal effect. This evolution signaled a continued reliance on fire as a primary tool for area denial and population suppression in subsequent conflicts. International legal bodies, particularly the nascent United Nations, grappled with the absence of specific prohibitions against incendiary weapons, a lacuna that persisted for decades. The Geneva Conventions, revised in 1949, addressed the protection of civilians but offered no explicit ban on the weapons themselves. This omission reflected the political realities of the Cold War, where major powers saw incendiaries as a vital component of their arsenals. The Protocol on Prohibitions or Restrictions on the Use of Incendiary Weapons, adopted in 1980, marked the first significant international attempt to regulate their use, specifically prohibiting their deployment against civilian populations and forests. However, its effectiveness remained debated, as many states, including the United States, ratified it with reservations or did not ratify it at all. The shadow of the firestorm, however, continued to influence military doctrine, even as its legal status remained ambiguous. The memory of the M69's devastating effectiveness, once a source of grim satisfaction for its crews, lingered as a stark reminder of the indiscriminate power unleashed from above. The weapon's design, a simple yet ingenious combination of volatile chemicals and aerodynamic casing, had irrevocably altered the landscape of modern warfare, leaving behind not just physical ruins, but also a profound ethical challenge. The production logs from the summer of 1944 recorded the output of over 1.5 million M69 bombs per month.